Hi, welcome back, everyone. Really excited to talk to David about the 3 episodes that we just watched. How did it feel watching your own show on Zoom for the first time?
Yeah, I actually haven't watched it in a while, so it was fun, and it does feel like the cast is so tight knit and fun to work with. It feels for me like hanging out with a group of friends, so it is actually quite nice. Yeah.
That's so nice. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned kind of in our secret text thread happening while we were watching the screening that there's a lot of improvisation, and so many of your actors are, alumni from like the Second City and Bad Dog Theater. So
Yeah, we improved a lot, and one thing that was interesting was when I pitched the show to the CBC and I used the word improv. We had like a few meetings, and then a few meetings later, they're like, "Oh, so it'll be outlines, and you'll kind of do that Larry David style, or more close to Christopher Guest." And I was like, "Absolutely not. That's not what I mean by improv. For me, improv and the way I learned is that once you've captured the material, then you get to do some fun takes and things like that. But the free flowing sort of Larry David, we have an outline, is terrifying to me, and I'm very cognizant that you need to get the key narrative points out of every scene to keep the story moving forward, because I think you can really end up in the cutting room trying to build a narrative, and you'd rather, from my perspective, feel really confident in the narrative through line so you can then allow the actors to play. And it doesn't feel indulgent doing the improv when you know you've captured those plot points and those story points. So I think I would just be a total nervous wreck if we just had an outline and we were sort of crossing our fingers that it all went somewhere and added up to something. But yeah, improv everywhere. Again, fantastic actors who every scene we'd capture it and then we let them go, wild. And Alice and Rodrigo and Tracy, and yeah, everyone's so good at bringing their own material to it, and Nilu, and yeah, so yeah, a lot of improvised jokes made the final cut, which I'm very proud of that fact.
that's great. Well, there's a lot of questions that have been submitted ahead of time, and you're also welcome to, ask questions throughout, and I'll make sure that we try to get to all of them if we can. But first, I wanted to ask you about like your early years at Innis. What kind of a college student were you? What was like your persona? And how do you think the like writing and rhetoric program sort of informed your voice as a comedy writer? Was comedy always something that you knew that you wanted to pursue? Did you know what you wanted to do when you started it in this?
I don't think I knew precisely. I would say my friend group, we definitely, the guys I met and the girls I met in first year, uh, were tilting very much towards the same sensibilities and those comedy sensibilities. So we had a very tight knit group in the res that were still really close friends, and we still had the same cultural sort of comedy touchstones together. So that friend group, and then the writing program, and I must shout out Sharon English specifically because I did her creative writing course, and she really is amazing. She's very supportive, and I think that it just legitimized the writing profession a bit more, being learning from her, and also, Innis having a whole curriculum dedicated to it. And I know there's, various versions of writing, but the fact that the creative writing course was just as important as any of the technical writing courses that I took. So that kind of opened my mind to it. And then, yeah, the first script I ever started to write was in a English 200 Shakespeare class. I just started during the class and then I've had an active script on the go ever since then. So that was probably second year of university. So yeah, it's just influenced me. And I will say, I came to Toronto to shoot Decoys. I arrived about a month maybe 2 months in advance, and I had the series beaded out and all the note cards and everything, but I hadn't actually firmed up the line by line scripts. And I finished those at Robarts, just like in the student days, and it was really fun. And I would just go up to the stacks of Robarts, 3 weeks out from shooting, and polish the scripts and work on them. And it's just such a good working environment, I find. I don't know if other people agree, but the campus and the life on it is just, yeah, it really inspires me.
That's wonderful. Shout out to Robots. Shout out to those chicken balls that I ate for $5 like every day throughout university.
Yeah.
So I know that your father and your uncle were both competitive duck carvers, and that you were dragged to competitions when you were 5 years old. Because I mean, that's such a niche, like fascinating world, and I think that's why the show is so captivating and charming and interesting. What was that like growing up, just having your dad be obsessed with carving ducks all the time?
Well, he's a woodworker, and the duck carving sort of ebbs and flows out of his woodworking attention. Sometimes he goes more to furniture, sometimes he goes more to carving. But yeah, I remember being born in Winnipeg and 5 or 6 years old, headed to a dingy convention center to look at ducks. And it's always just, again, it's been in the fabric of my life. And one thing I think about decoys is that you're never really 1 or 2 degrees away from at least a decoy or a decoy carver in Canada. It's kind of odd. Everyone has one at the cottage, sort of collecting dust, or someone's grandfather carved, or you've seen them. And so it's been a through line in my life, but I think people respond because it's also sort of omnipresent in a weird way in the culture. It's always tucked in the back of a bookshelf.
Yeah.
So yeah, and my dad, yeah, you've seen them at cottage. Yeah, once you sit down and think about it, you're like, oh yeah, they are sort of everywhere. But yeah, my dad, him and I continue to do woodworking together, and my uncle out of Edmonton, he's really deep in the carving scene now. He carves some really quality ducks. But one thing that really inspired me to start writing the series was my dad and my uncle went to do a carving course, like an intensive course, and like a week-long intensive with a grandmaster of carving. And I was like, oh, this is the subculture, right? Like, this is where the story is about the people who are willing to pay money and use their valuable vacation time to go for a intense, like, hands-on. And I think their course was just painting a duck. It wasn't even carving. You had to come duck paint ready, as they say in the biz. And it was only, so the and the detail, all that stuff is very appealing to me. And I think it makes, when people care about something, the ability to do a series about it, no matter how small stakes it is irrelevant, because they care. So the stakes are born out of their love for it, not the fact that it takes place in a 20,000 seat arena or anything like that. So once that started turning in my head, I was like, okay, the stakes are there because the obsession and the passion and the love is there. And then you can, and then it makes the carving history of my family and the lore, I guess. Oh, it's saying my connection is a bit unstable. I hope I'm coming through.
Yeah, you're coming through pretty clearly. That's so interesting, though, like infamous duck carving lore of the Pelech dynasty, the duck dynasty of your family. Someone had a question about, this comes from Richard, about just the first character that came to you when you started writing the show. And you've created such a like rich ensemble of, these different protagonists, but also, the people in their lives. And so I'm curious, when you're like mapping an ensemble comedy like this, how you sort of started putting all of those characters in place, and how you knew that Frank was going to be the antagonist and all of that.
Yeah, I think first was probably Frank, just because, and he's, I think, where everyone's mind goes when they see duck carving or woodworking. And so that's just easiest to go there first. And landing on him as the antagonist is, I just always like to poke fun of the people that sort of have an inability to adapt or change. It's just always sort of fun to me. It's just a constant of the universe. So why are you so antagonistic towards it? So that's him being unsettled by newcomers and technology and that sort of stuff is, and that's a bit easier. So then we had to start thinking about expanding the cast. And I will say the cast is probably more, you don't see a tremendous amount of young people at real duck carving shows, if I can put it that way. So
not a millennial trend right now.
But then there is the reason the sort of Donald character is that millennial and that craves doing something a bit more hands-on, who's getting a little bit sick of not having anything to show for his work or his time, and in that gray zone of that I think we all get into sometimes. It's like, what do I actually produce? Especially, people who, yeah, it just unsettles you a bit. So then that character was relatively easy, and having Donald's father be a carver, but having passed, was a way that we could do a sort of audience entry point and learn a bit, teach the audience sort of through character as Donald is being taught a little bit just what the world is. So we use that device to, just ease people into an esoteric world. And yeah, then we just had some fun. I think the inspiration for Aman Deep actually came from seeing the guys doing Hockey Night in Canada in Punjabi. And I really like those guys. I think they're very sharp and very interesting. And so I just was like, oh, what if, that it's happened to hockey? What if it happened to duck carving, right? And their broadcasts are very interesting. They're so passionate. So that was sort of the seed of the Aman Deep idea. And Barb and Dennis, it's just always fun to play with people who take things way too seriously. And so that was it. I had a few more carvers in early drafts, and just by necessity of the format and the length and the amount of time we're going to be able to shoot and all that sort of stuff, we had to pare it down a bit. And Barb and Dennis also seemed like another good vehicle to keep narrative moving forward and to explain things to the audience. So if it had just been there's just things that characters like that can do to help facilitate an audience and be funny. And so I think, and then Zeke, I think everyone gets to that point where they're frustrated with creative endeavors. So that's, as a sort of meta writer thing, it's just fun to do and fun to play with.
Yeah, it's a good metaphor for just the artistic process in and of itself. And I feel like your show is a really good example of that, of just kind of like how everybody wants to be creative, and there's no real way to make art, just like there's no way to carve a duck without just kind of going through it and taking inspiration where you find it.
Yeah, and I wanted to celebrate that creativity is valuable no matter what the sort of results or exterior ramifications of it. It's more an internal process, I think, and that there is sort of a battle within, and it doesn't actually matter if it's going to the ROM or if it's going on a mantelpiece. It actually doesn't matter, truly. It matters that you start it and you work hard and you finish it. And that's the sort of divinity of creative work rather than any lofty goal. And I can tell you that duck carving doesn't have any lofty heights to aspire to. So in a way, it's sort of beautiful in that sense, because I've always been envious as well of people who can get into a art form or a subculture and just lose themselves in it, because I always feel like I'm always half in my head about things, or one step in, one step out. And the so there's a bit of envy coming across when I wanted to celebrate people just doing it unabashedly.
I have to ask this question because I love it so much, and it's just this comes from Janny. How many ducks do you own personally? How did you acquire them? And if you have them handy, can we see your favorite one?
So I have no ducks in Los Angeles.
Oh,
I don't. I don't think I truly own any. The loon that my character is carving is carved by my real father in the series. And then the duck that Amandeep lands with is carved by my uncle. So those ducks exist in real life, and they were carved for the show specifically.
that's so nice.
Yeah, by my dad and my uncle. And then we actually got 2 casting ducks from Pat Godden, the God Godden, as I like to call him. He is a multi-time world award carving champion, the international. Well, he's one of the few people who makes a full-time living doing duck carving. Wow. And so, yeah, we got to use some of his ducks. Ducks of his have been insured for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and he's an amazing artist himself. And Jerry Glaves, who also competes at the national or international level, has a duck in the final 5 as well. So we went to the best carvers in the world, and if you stick around to episode 6, you do get to see some very nice shots of some very quality work. But no, I don't have any in my place right now.
Well, you'll have to get one because
I think I've seen
this for the rest of your life. And was there kind of like a method training sort of thing with the actors? Like, did you teach them how to carve ducks? Do any of the actors carve ducks in real life?
None of the actors do. Brian, who plays Frank, he does some carpentry and some woodworking. So he was the one that actually did the most active tool usage. He's actually planing a block of wood there with hand tools. And but yeah, everyone sort of took a few opportunities to burn some feathers in or to use the rotary tool, but we kind of used a bit of smoke and mirrors to not have to show too much real carving, because it is difficult and it can be a little bit tedious as well. So we kind of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we were talking before, we had this really interesting conversation about just kind of Canadian comedy and the CBC. And you were talking about how your dream for the CBC is that it becomes a place kind of for like auteur Canadian showrunners. And how you look at other countries like Britain, and they have these shows like I May Destroy You or Fleabag, and they're like these really detailed kind of auteur comedic series. And I'm just curious, like, what you think, why hasn't Canada sort of been able to kind of have that transition? I mean, we see some hallmarks of it a little bit in a show like Schitt's Creek, but how can Canada kind of be the place for sort of cutting edge comedic television, in your opinion?
I think it will have to come, I think, from the CBC trusting and leaning into those voices and starting to hear them a bit more and giving them the chance. And I think GEM is the right place, and these smaller series are the right place to start doing this, to start making compelling. I don't know, that's my hope. I don't know if there's a prescriptive way other than taking risk, which is, when the commerce is involved, is troublesome at times. But yeah, I do think it is possible, because there's a lot of infrastructure in Canada that can help finance shows and can help support shows. So it's my dream, and I think those shows out of England especially are just so good right now, and they are singular visions and they're driven by one person. But again, there also has to be the infrastructure in education to let people know that that's a possibility, that you can do all those things. And one thing I will say about my experience on Decoys is the only reason I took on the challenge is that I had watched someone do it firsthand, meaning I watched Stephen Merchant do it on Hello Ladies. So I knew exactly. So the education for the people who are coming up, who get to see all aspects of filmmaking, from prep to post, to understand what it takes to perform in a show, to manage a cast, to manage a crew, to make all those decisions. That's an education thing. And then I think that hopefully will bear its fruit. So yeah, and that comes from shadowing, letting people come on sets, being receptive to people who reach out. So if you do have a show, no matter how small, I think we had one person shadow for a half morning on Decoys, and we're a tiny little production, but it's like you still have to try to, because exposure is really important. Otherwise you don't, it seems mystical or mythical. And so yeah, I hope that I hope the larger CBC shows are having good shadowing programs and good exposure for young people coming up, and I think that's a way to do it. And yeah, fingers crossed, because those people exist in Canada. We might not
those voices are there, certainly.
shows, but we will have two. You know what I mean? It's not. So they definitely exist. It's just a matter of educating them around the filmmaking and the technical and some of the weirder aspects, like pitch meetings and all that sort of stuff. It's just not, even if you go to film school, it's not really taught. So
what
yeah,
was your experience show running, and also, you know, being an actor in the show, and seeing your work produced and collaborating with your director, Sebastian Kluwer?
Sorry, what's that?
Oh, what was your experience show running for the first time? And not only, you know, having written the show and created it and cast it, but also acting in it, and then having this director who you're now trying to make sure understands your vision for it.
Yeah, so my biggest fear going in was the directing aspect and the ability for us to capture everything. So I knew that I couldn't direct it myself. That was a bridge too far. I think that the sweet spot between acting, writing, and directing is 2 out of 3. I think when you're doing 3 out of 3, it's really, that's for people much more qualified or intelligent than I am. So yeah, Sebastian was key, because I don't know if you remember a show called Kenny versus Spenny.
Yeah, of course.
So he had directed a lot of that, and that's a hybrid show, meaning it's a documentary, but they do kind of, it's scripted for, you know, but it's heavily active. And so he had the experience of moving very quickly and being very, you know, light on his feet, open to changes. Nothing's going to set him off or surprise him, because he just had so much of that practical mock doc experience. So that gave me a lot of confidence. And then the operators that he knew and the DOP that he knew they had the camera on their shoulder 95% of the day. It was very much, everyone knew that we had, because we shot in 10 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So picking those people that had the willingness and the relevant experience eased it. And then I think my producers, Anton Leo, Shane Corkery, Dan Bennett from Counterfeit, they were there behind the monitors at every take, and they would push me on the acting, which was very important. And I told them beforehand, it's like, if it's not there, you guys have to push for me to get there, because I think you can fall into holes sometimes where people don't want to tell, you know, it's just like a weird dynamic. So I made sure they knew, and they took me to task, and they pushed me a lot. And the acting was the hardest part for me, I think, obviously. And
was it your first time acting?
So I had done a lot of stuff at Groundlings in LA through their courses and smaller shows, and then I had done a few like small things that were sizzles or pitch reels and stuff like that. But yeah, this was the first time on a more on just a bigger scale, with people there relying on you and money being spent and time, you know, time's a wasting and all that sort of thing. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest challenge. But going back to that sort of other point about improv and having the script there, the script was really nailed down. So there was no worry in my head that we had a narrative structure that made sense and that would pay off. So that took another weight off of me, where sometimes you get into situations, and TV shows a lot get into situations where you're writing sort of in the midst of things, which can be really stressful. So I knew that the scripts had to be locked, really locked, before we started shooting. I did a major rewrite about a week before we started shooting, but once we were shooting, we were pretty dialed and pretty locked on the script front. So that gave me that sheds a layer of anxiety. So having a director who was going to move fast, who would really know how to capture the coverage, so I didn't have to worry about that shed another layer. So the prep process was just about shedding layers of anxiety. And then and I think for the 10 days and for what we got out of the 10 days, I'm very proud of it. So.
That's great. I think a lot of people would be interested in just your trajectory from graduating from Innis and then, being mentored by Stephen Merchant and doing those internships at Conan and HBO. I mean, how does a Winnipeg man get those opportunities, and how would you recommend, if people are interested in pursuing a career in comedy writing and TV show development, what should they do?
Well, I always caveat this for Canadian people, as I do have a green card. I lived in the US a bit when I was growing up and then came back to U of T. So that greases the wheels. So that's sort of that aside. Yeah, I did a graduate program after U of T at Carnegie Mellon, and that program was more business oriented, but the benefit of it was that it was 1 year in their main campus in Pittsburgh, and then you moved to LA with a group of other students, and you had to start interning the day you got to LA. And the infrastructure of that program helped me get to Conan, and that Conan to me was a classic entertainment job. It was daily, like the show goes on daily. You're on the Warner Brothers lot. There's a pack of cheerleaders walks by, then an elephant comes by. It definitely felt show busy. So that felt really, really amazing and fun and high energy. And there's 2 script interns per semester. So I did that job, and that involves getting the changes out to everyone as they're happening. So if Conan changes a joke before he goes out, Q Cards needs it, the director needs it. So it was high octane running around because it was all paper based still. Yeah. So yeah, I was running paper. I had 7 copy machines that I was responsible for, and I was running paper around and going to graphics and going to sound effects. And, there were crazy moments where Conan's standing over the cue card guy's shoulder, the script coordinator's there, and I'm right there next to him waiting for the changes to be handed to me. And the music's playing and he's still changing. So that was entertainment, right? And that was really fun. And then I got an internship at HBO. And for students, this is a relevant story. The other script intern had only 1 semester to be in LA, and she had gotten an internship at HBO and Conan, and she chose Conan. And so while we were working together, I asked her, could you connect me to the people who hired you at HBO that you turned down, basically? And she did, and subsequently I got an internship at HBO. So for the student population, the internships and the sort of entry points you get in the entertainment industry come from odd places a lot. They don't necessarily come from website postings and things like that. So then I went into HBO, and that was really interesting. I was there on the desk of a comedy VP doing production, and it was the time that Girls was coming out and Eastbound and Down. So it was very energetic. There was a lot of press happening, but ultimately it was being in a sort of office environment, and I still wanted to go out on a show. I wanted to be on the creative side. So I begged and begged to go on a show, which was probably annoying, but it is what it is. I tried to get on Game of Thrones and worked out. And then Hello Ladies came around, and it was the show by Steven with these other two writers who had worked on The American Office, and I loved the script, and I asked my boss if I could go out, and they filled all the PA slots. So I was like, oh God, like, you know, it just happens that way. And then a day later, they called and said, Steven needs someone to work for him while he's here, and do you have
Wow.
anyone? I went the next day to interview with Steven. My interview with Steven lasted about 6 minutes. Then he hired me by the time I got back to HBO. And then the following Monday, I was sitting in on the network casting sessions watching with Steven, Sue Nagel, Mike Lombardo. I'd gone from just being a temp on a desk to, you know, getting this crazy level of exposure, because one of the good things about Steven was he didn't know how to really drive in America, and he didn't want to. So I went with him everywhere.
Wow.
And then I just went into the meetings as well, because for whatever reason, it's just how it shook out. So yeah, that began on the pilot of Hello Ladies. And then we did a pilot. We got picked up. We did season 1, and then we didn't get a season 2, but we got a movie. And on the movie, I started contributing more, pitching in the writer's room a bit, and helping out with that, and just sort of showing that I had some chops. And then, yeah, we did the Hello Ladies movie, and about a week later, we got sent a documentary about a family of wrestlers, asking if Steven wanted to write and direct a feature based on it. And so I helped Steven develop that. And that was it was just him and I for about 2 years. He doesn't have a big company or anything like that. So we just started breaking it, and we would play chess during the day and talk about story ideas and talk about converting the documentary to narrative, and talking about the problems with wrestling, because wrestling is not real, but the stakes are very real. And then how does that translate to a film, and the meta-ness of doing a film about something that's not real, but the audience treats as real. So what are the stakes of this? And all these sort of really, like, really fine-tuned script conversations, long, detailed things. And then, yeah, I would write first drafts of scenes and send them to him, and he'd edit them, and they're in the script. And
That's so
and then we went over to England to do it. And
This film is Fighting with My Family, by the way.
yeah, Fighting with My Family. So
Rock and Florence Pugh in it, and it's
so
it's about the wrestler China, right? No.
the wrestler Soraya Page.
Okay.
Her name's wrestling name. She has many names, but her name's Page. But yeah, Nick Frost, Vince Vaughn, Lena Headey, Dwayne Johnson.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, and that was a tremendous experience. Again, in just the exposure to, we got the first email. I got the first email. I was, CC'd on the first email from the agents all the way, and then we screened it at Sundance. So what is that whole holistic thing is rare to get to see every step of the journey. So yeah, that gave me more confidence to do something like Decoys, where I took on a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, is there like kind of one key message that you sort of learned both from observing that process and now having made your own show that you could communicate about, just like retaining your vision for something over, such a long time and sticking with it? And
yeah, the time scale of projects in the entertainment industry is bizarre, because they take very long until they don't take very long, and then you don't have enough time to do what you want to do. So I think maintaining energy over time is probably the key takeaway. And there's many ways to do that. And some of the ways that I've discovered personally is to do less things related to entertainment, meaning to sort of have things outside of it, just because. Carve a duck, do some woodworking, things like that, because the time scale, and even the time scale with Decoys, we were an IPF project. So part of that was filming an original proof of concept reel, and then waiting that time window to then get the okay to get the financing to actually shoot season 1. So yeah, I think it's just there's a Zen-like sort of, you have to give yourself over to the time scale because you're ready to do it if someone would cut a check to do it. But that's just not the practical workings of it. So, and then there are antidotes to the time scale, which one of those for me is improv. So doing improv is like, that is the heroine of seeing your results immediately, right?
Yeah.
And so by doing improv, twice a week and putting up a show every 9 months or whatever, it sort of scratches the itch of immediate response, meaning you hear the audience laugh or you don't. And so when you're working on these super speculative long-term things, the improv and live performance is actually an antidote in a certain way. So yeah, having that balance in your life, I think helps and has helped me.
I know that we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe you could recommend some, movies or TV that really inspires you, people that are watching great comedy shows or things that have influenced you as a filmmaker?
Well, I mean, there's so much, and obviously with Decoys, you see the best in show sort of the DNA from Best in Show is all over it, and the silliness is very fun. And yeah, I think I'm inspired by those shows that you find almost a friendship with the cast. And so The Office, the American Office especially, is weird. I keep seeing these things in memes in quarantine about people watching The Office for the 100th time or whatever, yeah. And the American ones had a lot of repeat viewing to it. And I think that's a byproduct of you're sort of just hanging out with a group of people you like to hang out with when you're watching it in a weird psychological way. So that's inspiring me. But yeah, Fleabag has been really good. I really love that. And I feel like I got a lot of my comedy viewing out at a younger age because I'm tending towards more serious things and dramatic things. But what have I been watching? I've been rewatching Mad Men, and that for me is inspiring in the production design and the commitment to detail and the texture and the world that they create. So that's inspiring to me. Shows like that really take the time, and you can go, oh yeah, they were firing on all cylinders from production designer to direct. Like it's such a world, I guess. So yeah, I've been enjoying that. And yeah, all those comedy classics. And I will say I was a tremendous, at age probably 6 to 9, Jim Carrey fan, and I'll always have a warm spot for Jim's work. And I think that, yeah, that inspired me to do. I always like there being physical gags, so letting Zeke dance on stage, which I guess it's a spoiler, but in episode 6, that physicality, all that sort of, like, I'm not above that type of thing. It's just enjoyment, and I don't want to shy away from things like that. So yeah, physical comedy, and yeah, I can't, what else is, I think I watched too much TV during lockdown probably, so yeah. I'm
Same.
Yeah.
Which leads me to one of my final questions, which is, have you finished Infinite Jest yet in quarantine?
I am on page 129 of Infinite.
Oh.
Yes. My sister got to pay, so I borrowed this from my sister, and she was like, oh yeah, I read it. I got to page 65, and her bookmark was still on page 65, so I had to call her out on that. But yeah, I'm working my way through this. Away and sort of force yourself through one of the great novels of our time is now. But yeah, it's been fun. And he is so funny. He's so funny, and his wordplay is so good. You could imagine him writing scripts that were kill, and some of the characters that he writes and the voices are so unique that, yeah, it's hard. but I'm loving it. I slog through it. It's not easy, but it's good.
I read it. I finished it, but it took me like about a year, and I think it made me feel like I became a better reader after reading it, like the same way when I took like a Ulysses class at U of T, where it felt like it had changed my brain and made me smarter and better. And there's some parts of that book that are just so pleasurable, and and then there's some parts where it's like a very technical description of a tennis match that goes on for like 30 pages, and then it leads into a footnote that's actually a footnote of a footnote of a footnote.
Yeah, it's work, but it seems, I feel like I sleep a little bit better at night knowing that I'm sort of doing work read this book. So yeah, that's what I'm up to these days.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everybody watching. Thank you to Shirley Kyle and Innis College. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what's next. Hopefully there'll be another season of Decoys.
Yeah, and there's 3 more episodes on CBC Gem in Canada. So that's, I think it's cbcgem.ca probably, or it's an app on smart TV and stuff like that. So it's out there. So check it out.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, David. First of all, for Decoys, I was laughing through the whole thing, and we were on a side chat while it was playing, and I was just annoyingly, I was like a fanboy already. I was just replaying lines, I was typing them out as though David had never heard them before. But I have to say, I was enjoying it more and more as it was going on, and so I'm definitely going to gobble up the remaining 3 episodes. I saved myself from watching it until we were playing it tonight so I could enjoy it with everyone else. I want to, especially the one person I didn't mention who should get a lot of credit for this event coming together is Ben Weststreet, our communications officer, who knows David and who, as soon as Decoys was coming out, said, you know, we have to do an event around this show. So it's courtesy of him. That's pardon the pun, he's the gem. Very much want to thank Chandler and David for their discussion of the work after the fact. And my only remaining task is to let people know that we have 2 events coming up fairly soon. The first is on September 21st at 7 p.m. And that will be a reading from and then a discussion of a new novel called We Two Alone by Jack Wang, who is a writer and a writing instructor in Ithaca. And it will be with the moderator Gil Adamson, who is a Giller nominee. And I should say that We Two Alone was one of the books to read that the Star put out earlier this summer. So maybe, David, you could add that to your book reading list after you get done Infinite Jest. And then on September 24th, we have a screening, the first of the Canadian Film Forum screenings this season, Guest of Honor by Adam Agoyan, who is not an alum of the college, but who is a friend of the college and whose other work we have screened in the past. And moderating that will be another person who has a connection to the college, Patricia Rosema, who has been a screenwriter in residence at the college. And that will be September 24th, starting at 6 p.m. And there's lots more coming your way that you know, I will happily be telling you about as the events proceed. But thanks again. I'm going to say good night. I've already, clearly it's night where I am. I was saying I have the film noir lighting going on here. So thanks everyone for participating. And thanks again to our guests. And good night. And see you soon, I hope. Thank you.